So, the plot to unleash a global bioweapon and cause mass terror around the world has been uncovered. The goal? To trigger a series of lockdowns that lead the whole world into a Chinese style tyranny. All this and more on today's episode of Man in America. Welcome. I'm your host, Seth Holhouse. Thank you so much for coming. It's Tuesday, my favorite way to kind of start the week off. I'm so happy to be here today. This is an important episode. And I'll say a few things about that before we get started. Everything that's happened in the past, year and a half especially, I think has left a lot of us shocked, in awe, and just trying to grasp what to make of everything. So if you look at what's happening, as I've been saying, others have been saying, all roads lead to China, right? So let's look at what's happening. How does this get us back to China? So if you look at what's happening right now, this is an important topic for us to understand. And some recent developments that have come out show a lot more of a sinister plan behind what's happening. And so this is a show that I'm going to try to not to interject too much of my own opinion. This is an episode that I hope that you can share with your friends and family and say, look, maybe this will help you make sense of what's happening in the world today. Because I think that, as we've talked about before, one of the most important things that we can help our fellow Americans understand is that we are not the enemies. The enemy is China and really the globalists. And the more that you look into this, the more you see that they're working hand in hand, and that you see, as we've talked about many times before, I'm seeing that a few of you are saying that the microphone or the audio is not good. Let me know actually in the comments, does the audio sound okay? Let me know how it sounds. I see a few of you are saying that the audio is not sounding very good. Of course, as this is a live show, we occasionally have our technical difficulties. Sometimes I have no idea. Okay, thank you. Everyone's saying it sounds good. Great. Sometimes it's not sure what's even causing some of these issues. But anyway, back to the point that I was making is that this is an important part of the overall topic that we have to help our fellow Americans understand, especially those that we don't really see eye to eye with, that have been misled by the mainstream audio. Mainstream audio. I'm sorry, reading the comments about the audio. They're saying left audio channels out. I'll look into that. As long as it's okay for this show, I'll fix it for the next show. Okay. So basically, back to my original point now that we're going, is that this is something that we have to help our fellow Americans understand, that the enemies are not each other. It's not black versus white, left versus right, rich versus poor. The true enemies is this group of people sitting up top that, there's a lot of names for these people. I can't say those names because I'll get my channel canceled. But in today's show, I want to look at exposing what's happening and talking about what are some of the plans behind these things. So we're going to be looking at the UN, the WHO, the Chinese Communist Party, Davos, some of these key players, how it plays into what's happening in the world. So let me first start off with asking, of course, where's everyone from? I always love, as I say over and over again, I love coming on here. I love that we've got people coming from around the world to watch this show, because as I've said before, this isn't an issue that only affects America. Even though it's Man in America, yes, I'm just some man in America. Affects everybody. So wow, from Serbia, Prince Edward's Island, Canada, Taiwan. Wow, thank you, Taiwan, for visiting. Minnesota, Portland, Oregon, San Diego, Rhode Island in the house, Qatar. Wow, fantastic. Wiley, Texas, Arizona, Buffalo, Florida Keys. Sorry about your mosquitoes down there. Puerto Rico, Spain, Tunisia, Boston, Idaho, Pennsylvania. Gosh, wow. Thank you everyone for joining. Quebec. My prayers are with the Canadians. I'm not sure if you saw recently the pastor that got arrested up there. Just absolutely terrible. There is Chinese style leadership happening in Canada. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into the meat of the show. It's a fair bit of reading I'm going to be doing today because some of the authors that I'm going to be covering, some of the journalists have covered the topic better than I can in my own words. And so I'll try to read in a more entertaining voice to keep everyone interested. But the topic is very serious, and this is very important for us. So let's go ahead and jump into the first article. So this is something this hasn't been covered much in the mainstream media or even some of the more prominent media that you would expect to be covering this thing. But I see this as one of the most important pieces of information that's come out in the past year about what's happening. So this is on the Epoch Times. Again, I'll keep touting their praises, singing their praises, that this is the place where I go, especially to understand what's happening as it relates to China. So what they're saying here is that Chinese military scientists in 2005 detailed a plot to unleash a bioengineered SARS coronavirus to cause mass terror and advance the communist regime's global political ambitions. There's an intro sentence for you. These newly uncovered revelations come amid intensifying scrutiny over the possibility that the COVID-19 pandemic originated from a laboratory leak in Wuhan, an institute that has collaborated with the Chinese military. And if you look into the history of this, it was also very involved with the Obama administration. Our famous Dr. Fauci has a lot of very suspicious ties to this lab. I'm not going to go into his story right now as it relates to this, but again, there's some very suspicious ties to this. So what happened, the Chinese military scientists' theory were detailed in a 2015 book. This was first reported recently by The Australian, which is a News Corp, right? So News Corp, which that's Murdoch. I can't say whether he's too good or bad, but some of his news organizations are reporting very truthfully. So the scientists advocated for the weaponization of pathogens, including, guess it, SARS coronaviruses, to, quote, cause terror and gain political and strategic advantage over an enemy state. So it's talking about how the SARS epidemic, if you recall, this was in 2002, 2003, infected close to 3,000 and killed 425 people outside of mainland China, according to the WHO, which I don't really trust. Experts say the numbers inside the China are likely much higher than officially reported, which of course is as the norm. So this book, 261-page book titled The Unnatural Origin of SARS and Genetic Weapons Based on Man-Made Viruses, was published in February 2015 by the Military Medical Science Press. It's a publishing house owned by the Chinese military, or the PLA, People's Liberation Army. And they say, quote, the development of bioweapons has entered into an unprecedented new stage in history. The authors went on to implore Chinese experts to understand and pay attention to contemporary genetic weapons for any possible future wars, including the advent of a third world war. The contemporary genetic weapons the authors wrote about refers to using experimental biotechnology and animal testing to modify the genes of pathogens which could be tailored to target the specific genetic traits of enemy populations. So they go on to say, deploying such bioweapons would be more advantageous than using conventional warfare and military actions. The authors argued, because military moves can be traced back to the state and result in international condemnation. So genetic weapons, on the other hand, can be concealed in deployment, and it is hard finding evidence against them, the authors wrote. Isn't one of the common things that we have happening here, I guess, the discussion of what's the origin of this, and they still can't prove, though there's a lot of speculation as it ties back to Wuhan. As of right now, though, there's nothing definitive, right? So case in point, this was written 6 years ago. Now listen to this. Even in the face of academic, virological, or animal evidence, one can deny, prevent someone from raising the issue, suppress possible accusations, leaving international organizations and righteous people helpless. Let's look at this, right? So they're saying even in the face of evidence of any kind, they can still just deny, prevent people from raising the issue, suppress possible accusation. Like, what do you see happening on Twitter and Facebook? We're seeing the absolute suppression of our free speech to even talk about these things. Just so you know, everyone watching, I'm also streaming live on Rumble. So if this gets taken down, which, who knows these days, it is going to be up on Rumble. And if you want to be using Rumble instead of YouTube, after the video, I'll post the link into the description for that. But what's also interesting is they say, leaving international organizations and righteous people helpless. Well, there you go. There's the CCP. So I want to jump down a little bit towards the end here and just say and go and basically what it says. The book discussed at great length the potential fallout of a bioweapon attack and the optimum conditions to release such a weapon. It says any attack is likely to overwhelm the local health sector and around ground zero, the book said. The medical sector would be under enormous burden because of the sheer numbers of patients, it said. In addition, the need to put patients under quarantine, as well as prolonged medical treatment, would further strain medical resources. So, and one thing to say about this, it goes on to talk, and it goes into the origins a little bit more there, but something that this is interesting to look at is that when the SARS pandemic was happening, and H1N1, this was Obama, again, working with Fauci. So when that happened, they exhausted a lot of the U.S. resources of PPE, right? Personal protection equipment, I believe is what it stands for. So masks, like if you remember early last year, there was this shortage, right, of masks, the different kinds of biohazard suits, any kind of protective gear. There was a shortage. Well, it just so happens that under the Obama administration, they used up an immense amount of those resources, but they just so happened to forget to refill those resources. So under Trump, when this all happened, he was left without the normal resources that we'd be prepared for. And that's just a side note. Again, so I'm not going to be going into Fauci too much in this particular episode, but a lot of this points to him and the laboratory, and there's a whole host of things I could be talking about that I'm not going to talk about on YouTube because that's CommuTube these days. But it's interesting though, because if you watch one of my more recent videos talking about how I think it was even 2013, Xi Jinping was already starting to talk about China wanting to overtake the global internet and basically take control of the global internet, right? So again, you have to look at sometimes that present proves past, right? What's happening now today? How can we look at what's happening now today and look back at what happened in the past? And does that lead up to something, right? Is it a coincidence that in 2015, the Chinese military published a almost 300-page book detailing the effectiveness of using a bioweapon, a coronavirus bioweapon, against basically the whole world to allow them to implement a Chinese communist-style global tyranny? Is that a coincidence? I don't know. To me, it sounds like it is. But this is what I look for. I look for these coincidences. Okay. Now, this is just China, right? This is China that's been behind a lot of these things, and a lot of these things point to China. But there's also this other group of people that is working hand in hand with China, but have been a little bit more into the discussion about what's their involvement, right? These people like Bill Gates, the World Health Organization. So what is their involvement in this, right? Again, let's look at present proves past. So I'm not sure if you've heard about this, and I hope I don't get the video deleted for talking about this, but this was in 2019. So on Friday, October 18th, 2019, a group of people got together and they held an exercise called Event 201. Now, I'm not sure if you've heard about this, but again, these aren't conspiracies. This is their official website, okay, for Event 201. And the Event 201 exercise, let's look at the highlighted area there. The Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, the World Economic Forum, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation jointly propose these recommendations. right? Let's look down at the bottom. Now, you can't see because I'll take my picture off real quick, right? Let's see who's behind this. John Hopkins, the World Economic Forum, UN, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So let's look at this. What was this? Okay. What is this scenario they're talking about? What is Event 201? Well, what it was, now keep in mind, this happened in October of 2019. The earliest cases that were reported in China were supposedly happening in the early part of 2020, around January. So let's read what was the Event 201 scenario. It was a group of these people, these intellectuals and supposedly thought leaders, that got together to run through a scenario, right? An exercise exploring what would we do if this happened. So Event 201 simulates an outbreak of a novel zoonotic coronavirus transmitted from bats to pigs to people that eventually becomes efficiently transmissible from person to person, leading to a severe pandemic. The pathogen and the disease it causes are modeled largely on SARS, but it is more transmissible in the community setting by people with mild symptoms. Sounds familiar. Now, in this exercise, they're saying that the disease starts in pig farms in Brazil quietly and slowly at first, but then it starts to spread more rapidly in healthcare settings. When it starts to spread efficiently from person to person in the low-income, densely packed neighborhoods of some of the mega cities in South America, the epidemic explodes. It is first exported by air, traveled to Portugal, the US, and China, and many other countries. So they're talking about how there's no possibility of a vaccine being available in the first year. There's a fictional antiviral drug that can help the sick, but not significantly limit the spread of disease. It's fictional. Interesting. So since the world human population is susceptible during the initial months of the pandemic, the cumulative number of cases increases exponentially, doubling every week. And as the cases and deaths accumulate, the economic and societal consequences become increasingly severe. Now, in their plan here, in their exercise, it says the scenario ends at the 18-month point with 65 million deaths. The pandemic is beginning to slow down due to the decreasing number of susceptible people. The pandemic will continue at some rate until there is an effective vaccine, interesting, or until 80 to 90% of the global population has been exposed. From that point on, it is likely to be an endemic childhood disease. So let's look at this. And also, I will remind you, I see someone commenting on that. Thank you, Little Tai Chi Mermaid, that please like this video. I'll give you a few reminders throughout. Please like the video. It helps me bypass the YouTube algorithms that do not want channels like mine to reach more people, so that if you get a lot of likes coming in, it will help the video spread to more and more people. So again, please like me, like the video, subscribe, click on notifications. YouTube has a way of unsubscribing. When I look at my list, my subscribers are dropping a lot of days because YouTube just pulls people off. So make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you hit the thumbs up button to help spread. And if you want to follow me on social media, I highly recommend that you find me up on Telegram. After the video, I'll put the link into the description. It's t.me/Man in America. So again, back to this. Okay. So we're looking at what do we have? So before the pandemic really hit in early 2020, we've already got in 2015 an entire book written by the Chinese military talking about how a bioweapon, the release of basically a coronavirus bioweapon, would be the most effective way to wage a World War III and allow a Chinese-style tyranny or governing system to be implemented worldwide. So we've talked about in the recent show about the China's goals to take over the internet, right? And I looked at one of the books that Xi Jinping had recently published, right? Which this is, how it works in these communist countries is that the leader will publish a book. I'm sure that he didn't even write it. Maybe he didn't even read it. But these books become mandatory study for the Communist Party, at universities, for teachers. It's how they keep the propaganda flowing into society. Well, in this book, Xi Jinping directly outlined his ambitions basically to bring a Marxist style of rule to the entire world. Okay. That his ambitions were not to just become the most powerful nation, right? In the past, you'd have nations battling, going to war, they wanted to take over this certain enemy territory. That's not the case for this, right? It's no longer a hidden secret. You can find information about this everywhere. I talk about it a lot. The head of the Chinese Communist Party has the goal to basically take over the world and form a one world government that Xi Jinping is in control of, using their technology to bring in what you call a technocracy. Right? Technocracy is a society that's ruled by those who control the technology. So to bring in a technocracy, if you've seen China's social credit system, you've seen their camera systems, their 5G systems, this is what they're trying to do, is implement these systems globally, right? So if that's his ambitions he's been talking about for quite a while now, we look at, again, 2015, this book written about how the best way to wage a war for World War III, which is happening without any bloodshed, you can't trace it back, they can deny it even started from them, was through a coronavirus biological attack. Now, I'm not making these things up. I'm just pulling different parts of information together. I'm barely even theorizing at this point. I'm just linking together different types of reports and information that even you yourself can go look up. Okay. So then what we have is we have Event 201, which happens months before the actual supposed outbreak of the coronavirus, where you have our same characters, right? World Economic Forum, which ties directly to the UN, ties to the World Health Organization, which has played a significant role in this, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which just so happened to be, what's their main business now? Okay, you got it. Okay, they're in this business. And so you have all these things working together. Okay, so, and these are things you can look in the past and see these discussions and these plans were happening before the beginning of last year. Okay, which is just incredible. Now, and I had already pieced some of these things together, but something that I learned about, so let me pull up the next article. Well, and actually, this is almost, I'll kind of sideline my previous point. I want to show you something here, which is almost comical. This is a statement, right? So the Johns Hopkins University, or the School of Public Health, their Center for Health Security, released this statement, okay, saying, in October 2019, the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security hosted a pandemic tabletop exercise called Event 201 with partners, the World Economic Forum and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Recently, the Center for Health Security has received questions about whether that pandemic exercise predicted the current novel coronavirus outbreak in China. To be clear, the Center for Health Security and partners did not make a prediction during our tabletop exercise. For the scenario, we modeled a fictional coronavirus pandemic, but we explicitly stated that it was not a prediction. Instead, the exercise served to highlight preparedness and response challenges that would likely arise in a very severe pandemic. Have you ever read a more BS statement than that? They think that we're absolute idiots. Okay, so they come out in October, before this all starts, months before the pandemic starts, and they play out an exercise of the exact same thing happening. And then it happens a few months later, and they come out and they say, look, we're going to be clear that exercise we performed, which was an exact example of what happened a few months later, was not a prediction, right? They don't even mention it's a coincidence. They don't even mention it's a coincidence. They say we were not predicting an outbreak of this scale. It's like, oh, okay. You must have just randomly done some exercise thinking that maybe in the next 30 years there's going to be some sort of coronavirus pandemic. I mean, come on. It's just that they think that we're a bunch of idiots. And maybe we would have been 10 years ago when all of us were hooked on mainstream media. But since then, too many of us have detached. We've pulled the matrix plug out of the back of our heads, and we're seeing the reality in front of us, and we're not standing up for it. We're not taking it anymore. We're no longer buying the poison they're trying to feed us, right? So, okay, but let me look at again. Now, this is an interesting report that came out on the Gateway Pundit, right? So, what's the other involvement in this? Okay, so billions, this just came out a couple days ago, billions in US money, knowledge, and skills were given to China's virus research program, ultimately resulting in COVID 19. So, US government officials, the media, and in particular members of the scientific community for their own personal, political, or financial advantage have continued to promote the false narrative that COVID came from nature. It did not. So this is an article. I'm not going to go into the details of this, but basically what they're pointing out in here is that so much of, again, as I talked about before with Obama, with Fauci, right? So many global resources have been going to China ahead of this, ahead of everything happening. Okay. But right here, let's look at what they're saying about China, right? So they're talking about the research, and it says that COVID-19 has a number of unusual features which cannot be explained by a normal evolutionary process. The only questions remaining are how and where the COVID-19 was made and whether its release was accidental or deliberate. Well, so in China, there is no difference between military and civilian virus research. So this guy's talking. So this is the author of this article. I'll see my spot there. This is a guest post by a PhD. His name is Lawrence Sellen. He says, in recent months, I and other COVID-19 detectives have conducted a virus research network analysis of China's virus biowarfare program. So he talks about that here. But one of the points he makes is that the CCP's biowarfare program has 3 levels: a secret military level upon which civilian institutes and universities are layered. So basically, what he's also saying here is over the last 30 years, China's PLA, People's Liberation Army, has deeply infiltrated American virus research program. Right? So you have to wonder, how did they get access? How did they gain access to our virus programs? Obviously, we know that they have various methods of doing that. They have their own spies that come in and they get groomed. They go to the top schools, they end up getting into these programs, and they're sending stuff back to China. Some of these people have been caught. They also get this information through honeypotting, right? Which, look at Swalwell and Fang Fang, right? They've got this beautiful Chinese woman. Now, what's interesting with Swalwell is that Fang Fang started targeting him back, I think, when he was just on a I think a city council board. So it wasn't even when he was in his current position. She had followed him through the ranks of him getting to where he got to in his political career. So this isn't a strategy they've been implementing over the past couple of years. Even in this, it says that it's a 30-year long infiltration, okay, into our laboratories to steal what we've been doing. And then you also have administrations like the Obama administration that are openly giving money to the laboratories over there. So it's almost like in the past it had to be hidden. It becomes so brazen that now it's like, why not? Hey, Iran, here's billions of dollars. Go ahead and take it. They've just become so flagrant in their criminal behavior. So now I want to look at something, and this is the point that I was going to make earlier, is that if you look at what is the intention behind this from the perspective of the Chinese Communist Party? Is it to release something so deadly that it wipes out half the world's population? No. And that's why I think there's also been a lot of discussion about how deadly is this, right? Why did the flu disappear last year? I've got a lot of thoughts on that I don't share on YouTube because of their obvious censorship. So, but the question is, what is this, right? I do believe that within China, that they've had very, very strong and deadly reactions to this. I think that they were testing some variants of this on their own citizens, which I think that led to something else happening there. I do believe that there have been a lot of deaths in China that have gone unreported. So if you look at this, what's the purpose of releasing this? Now, this was a new discovery I made over the past couple of days while researching for this show. And it actually, I didn't realize this, but the entire lockdown model, right? You know how much all of you in your own countries have felt the effects of the lockdown. I certainly have here. I know that in Canada, they're really feeling it, what's happening in Canada, the lockdowns, especially as they're targeting churches and specific organizations that threaten their, I would say, a satanic globalist agenda. But if you look at, so this is interesting, is that the lockdowns, where the lockdowns come from, because in my opinion, it's the lockdowns that have actually caused the most damage. It's the lockdowns that have decimated economies around the world. Look at what's happened in America. As much as Trump was fighting this so hard and saying he didn't want to go into that, look at what's happened. Look how many small businesses have been shut down. Look how much unemployment there is, right? So let's look at the lockdowns. So this is an article that I found. So this was written January 10th, and this was an open letter that was prepared by this list of people: attorneys, a retired brigade general, a doctor, other attorneys. So this was an article that was written. They wrote it to the FBI. Now, unfortunately, good luck with those guys. But they also sent it to the UK security services, MI5. And they sent it basically to the main intelligence services in a lot of the main countries in the world, Western countries in the world. So what this letter is saying is this point right here. This is one of the main points. This is a long open letter. I'll post a link in the description. The main point they're making is that lockdowns originated on the order of Xi Jinping, General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, and were propagated into global policy by the World Health Organization with little analysis or logic. So let me read that to you one more time. Listen to this. Lockdowns originated on the order of Xi Jinping, General Secretary of the CCP, and were propagated into global policy by the World Health Organization with little analysis or logic. So, and I'm gonna read some of this article to you, but one of the main points that they're making here is that never in history have lockdowns been a way to deal with a pandemic. There were some references to how things were done during the Spanish flu, but never like this. So this is new information for me. I didn't realize this, that the entire model for lockdowns came from Xi Jinping espousing how he handled Wuhan, and then immediately the WHO, which Trump pulled out of at one point, the WHO immediately making that the gold standard for everyone around the world, right? So let's go back to this article. I'm going to read a few things here. So for one, it says, although the U.S. has faced many epidemics and pandemics, and state and local governments have employed a variety of interventions in response, they have never previously been lockdowns of entire populations, much less for lengthy and indefinite periods of time. While unquestionably states and local governments restrict certain activities for a limited period of time to mitigate the Spanish flu, there is no record of any imposition of a population lockdown in response to that disease or any other in our history. All right, so let's look at a few things that they're saying here. So Donald Henderson, the man widely credited with eradicating smallpox, wrote in 2006, quote, "Experience has shown that communities faced with epidemics or other adverse events respond best and with the least anxiety when the normal social functioning of the community is least disrupted," end quote. You would think that they might be referencing people that have actually handled these pandemics, right? The person who widely credited with eradicating smallpox and saying this. To our knowledge, no scientist ever publicly supported imposing lockdowns until Xi Jinping, General Secretary of the CCP, personally authorized the, quote, unprecedented lockdown of Wuhan and other cities beginning on January 23rd. So he goes on to say that General Secretary Xi is perhaps best known for the punishment of over 1 million CCP officials for corruption, the elimination of term limits from China's constitution, and of course, the re-education and quarantine of over 1 million Uyghur Muslims and other minorities infected with extremism throughout the regions of Xinjiang and Tibet, pursuant to the CCP's pet hybrid of public health and security policy. That's a scary one, where you blend public health and security policy. We're seeing that happen under Biden. They say it's Fang Kong. It's the same policy that inspired Xi's lockdown of Hubei province. General Secretary Xi later affirmed that he had issued these instructions to the CCP's Politburo Standing Committee on January 7th, 2020, but his instructions had never been revealed. And listen to this. Chinese business leader Ren Zhiquang was sentenced to 18 years in prison for an open letter in which he requested Xi's instruction be made public. So when the lockdown of Hubei province began, the World Health Organization's representative in China noted, listen to this is right when it began, that, quote, trying to contain a city of 11 million people is new to science. The lockdown of 11 million people is unprecedented in public health history. Human rights observers also expressed concerns, but those concerns did not stop the WHO from effusively praising the CCP's unprecedented response just days after the lockdown began, and long before it had produced any results. And I'm not sure if you remember seeing, but there were videos coming out in Wuhan, in Hubei province, of them literally welding shut apartment doors. They were taking whole buildings, apartment complexes, and welding them shut so that the people, the citizens living there, could not even escape. They could not get out. So it says that, quote, the measures, again, this is the representative, the WHO's representative in China. The measures China has taken are good not only for that country, but also for the rest of the world. And then WHO Director Tedros added that he was personally, quote, very impressed and encouraged by the President Xi's detailed knowledge of the outbreak, end quote. And the next day praised China for, quote, setting a new standard for outbreak response. This is insane to even read this. I really hope that if you're watching, you can share this video with your friends or family, help them understand who's behind all these things. Shortly afterward, the WHO held a press conference during which the Assistant Director General, Bruce Aylward, who later disconnected a live interview when asked to acknowledge Taiwan, who's done fantastic with this, with their handling of the coronavirus, told the press, quote, what China has demonstrated is you have to do this. If you do it, you can save lives and prevent thousands of cases of what is a very difficult disease, end quote. 2 days later, in an interview for China Central Television, he put it bluntly by saying, copy China's response to COVID-19. Okay, so continuing. So furthermore, the WHO did not even consider other countries' economic circumstances, demographics, or even the number of cases, which were very few in most of the world, before instructing the entire world that you have to do this. The conclusion by the world's foremost public health body, the WHO, was at best criminally negligent. Lockdowns are a Xi Jinping policy, and the significance of that fact cannot be overstated. The idea of locking down an entire state or country and forcibly shutting down its businesses and public places was never entertained, never discussed, and never implemented in any pandemic literature until it was done by Xi Jinping in January 2020. Lockdowns were never tried before 2020 and never tested before 2020, even on a theoretical basis. The idea of lockdown was brought into human history on the order of General Secretary Xi. It otherwise never would have entered the collective human imagination. Anytime anyone endorses a lockdown for any length of time, even a few minutes, they are endorsing a Xi Jinping policy. The remainder of this letter exposes how lockdowns were laundered into the world's go-to pandemic policy. So again, I'll post these links into the description of the video after I finish viewing, after I finish this show, so you can click on and read. This is a very long article. It's an incredible article. Let me just read some of the just subtitles. What do you call these things? Like we'll call them chapters, the subheads of what they talk about, just so you know, you can go back and read about this. So 2, the most influential institution for COVID-19 models, self-described as China's best academic partner in the West, has been by far the most alarmist and inaccurate COVID-19 modeler. Look at the next one. 3, deadly recommendations for early mechanical ventilation came from China. So this whole article, I'll keep going, talks about how all of this stuff comes from China. All these things are coming from China. Everything that went wrong with how the governments handled this. You had, I'll make myself big again. What you have happening is you have China, how they handled things. WHO, the global controller, the global health, World Health Organization that every government is listening to except for Trump, right? So you have China do this, then they feed this information up to WHO. WHO then basically espouses that information to the world leaders all over the world. And then those world leaders then implement the same exact things that China is telling them to, right? Lockdowns, social distancing, masks, all these things, right? And now we're getting into the jabs, as you might call them, right? Which is a different story. So what you have happening is through this mechanism of this medical crisis, as we talked about in the very beginning, potentially for World War III, the most effective way is that you have China, through its health monopoly, through its ties and its control over the WHO, directing, you have a communist country directing how every country in the world handles a pandemic crisis that came from China. I mean, talk about, look, if you're into military strategy, talk about a brilliant strategy for a country to gain global control. So back to that article, I'll read a few more of these different subheads. You see exactly, goes back to China. 4, the world's predominant wildly inaccurate PCR testing protocols are based on incomplete theoretical genome sequences supplied from you-know-where, China. Okay. 5, predominant excessive PCR testing protocols also came from China. 6, studies showing significant asymptomatic transmission, the only scientific basis for lockdowns of healthy individuals, came from China. And it just goes on and on and on. 7, the CCP engaged in an early, broad, systematic, and global propaganda campaign to promote its lockdown response. It just goes on and on and on. This, to me, is just, it's mind-blowing. It's absolutely mind-blowing how all these things fit together. And if you look at what's happening under Biden in a lot of these Democratic cities, you can see they are pushing forward the same agenda as they are directed to, locking down the country, everything that they're doing. You can see how it's all coming from China. Now, this last article I'm going to pull up, it's about a half-hour read. I'm going to put it in the description after I finish the video so you can read it for yourself. The title alone, you'll see what's happening here. China and the Great Reset. Now, this is an incredible article. This was written in December 18th, 2020. I'm going to read a little. I have some highlighted parts here I want to read to you. It's how the Chinese Communist Party and Western tech globalists sold a lockdown to the world. Oh, from the 20th to the 24th of January 2020, the 50th World Economic Forum met in the Swiss city of Davos. At the same time, on January 23rd, China imposed the first lockdown in the history of humankind, and the global avalanche of corona coverage began just a few days later. WHO Director Tedros was already praising China's method as precedent-setting. Almost every country on Earth copied China in the following months. In the meantime, Klaus Schwab, the executive chairman of the WEF, was looking forward to the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for a great reset that he conjured out of his hat in front of the global public in Davos. Each additional day of lockdown brings big tech, big pharma, and big money unbelievable profits on accidents, and convergences of interest in the 21st century. So on March 6, 2020, in Wuhan, fake, it's all fake, sounds shrilly from the skyscrapers in Wuhan as the Chinese Vice President Sun Chunlan and their delegation from Peking get an idea for themselves of the situation in the dangerous infected area. The scenery is eerie, a dystopian end times atmosphere. Streets empty of people in the midst of gray housing blocks. Only the circle around Xi Jinping, his inner cadre, strides along stone-faced. Intruding calls from the locked-up citizens of Wuhan break the silence. Fake, they call. We protest. And formalism, which means symbolic politics. So it goes on to explain what was happening in Wuhan. Okay, I'm going to play this video really quick. So what this is basically saying, before I dive in this article, I want to help give a little bit of context for what this article is explaining here, is that basically when the outbreak happened in China, especially in Wuhan, that there is a series of staged things that would make the world scared of this virus. And so that they basically, it talks about this as the most comprehensive disinformation campaign ever to get the entire world feared. They strategically staged things happening in China to make the whole world fear this pandemic. So I'll jump back into it and I understand. Even look at this video. To me, look how fake this is. This is a guy that wanted to go past a checkpoint. He refused to stop. Look how fake this whole thing looks. He gets out of the car. He spits on the ground. They put a bag over his head. They carry him away. Now watch as the sprayers come with all their disinfectant. Does that not look like it looks like a CNN video, right? Yeah, sonic suicide, you nailed it. It looks like a CNN video. So, and you have, this is what happens when you try to escape a coronavirus checkpoint, right? So again, making the whole world fear what's happening. Okay. So let's look down. I think I have some highlighted things. Oh no, I don't have highlighted for you. Okay. So basically, what they're going in to say here, I'll explain this. This is a long article because it's a half-hour read, and I'll read some things of it. But what they were doing though is it goes in to talk about the China's bots, right? So if you watch the episode on China wanting to control the internet, what it's basically saying is that China has these, what they call the 50-cent army. There's a rumor they get paid 50 cents per post, right? Which is probably untrue. So they have employed full-time around 2 million people that are basically professional online trolls to control information that's happening online. They've got about 20 million people working part-time. So China has a massive army of people that are going online. They're posting on Twitter. They're responding to comments. They're commenting on videos, commenting on articles. It's like if you're looking at Trump's Twitter feed, for instance, all those negative posts spreading, fear, Chinese propaganda when he was active on there. So many of these are actually people that are employed by the CCP. So what they said is that before the pandemic started, these trolls, we'll call them trolls, were primarily focused on controlling the narrative within China. After the pandemic started, they almost all shifted their focus to controlling the narrative about the pandemic, promoting lockdowns, promoting all the different things that China was doing, praising China, There's a separate article I found that had a bunch of research on this. They were saying that, oh, is that still repeating up there? Okay, sorry, I saw someone say it was repeating. So, um, the entire narrative shifted to basically promote China and how they were doing things. And there was one article, I think it was something talking about the lockdowns, and they did an analysis of the comments, and it was like 46% of the comments they traced back to being trolls in China. Okay, insane. So back to this article, and this is a heavy article that gets into this, but it's showing how, again, I'm not sure if you saw these videos of, this was in August, how they showed that Wuhan was already having these big pool parties, and how, oh, they're already back to normal. Again, as more propaganda to say it was really bad in the beginning. If you remember seeing the video of the guy falling down on the street when they're talking about how it was initially hitting, and it was this super deadly virus, people were just passing out in the street and laying dead in the street. When did you ever see that happen anywhere else in the world? I never saw that in America, never saw it anywhere, right? If you look at those videos, there's a lot of information that shows that those videos were faked and basically being used as propaganda, right? So what are they saying here? The core message of the CCP propaganda is always the same. China is the only country in the world to have perfectly managed the pandemic. The Chinese system is superior. Whoever doesn't do it like China is inhumane. So I'm going to read a little bit of this too. This is intense. With a short but hard lockdown, quarantine, disinfection of inner cities and social distancing, PCR test saturation, rigorous contact tracing, and total surveillance of all citizens. Face recognition, rapid tests, and temperature measurements at the entrance of all public buildings, containment and zero COVID, total containment of the coronavirus was reached. Governments and politicians who instead opted to let the pandemic run its course on for herd immunity are immoral, 2 steps from eugenics, and responsible for thousands of avoidable deaths. If you remember when Trump was in charge and everyone was saying, you're responsible for all these deaths, you killed hundreds of thousands of Americans. So the logic of a psychological war on this scale is as simple as it is irresistible. If other countries can be brought to run their economies into the ground with long lockdowns, products, businesses, branches, and the whole infrastructure can be bought up, grow oneself, and let others shrink, and all that with any direct bloodshed. At the same time, one portrays oneself as morally superior and exports one's own cultural values to the world. As of mid-November of 2020, most countries on Earth are deep in recession after month-long lockdowns, while China is enjoying a growth rate of 4.9%. Incredible. So let's look further into this. From Davos to Silicon Valley, managers, CEOs, and transhumanists are praising the efficiency and precision of the Chinese system. The Chinese Communist Party has been building up its institutional influence in the Western world for decades. They now have the right friends and supporters on the right switchboards. And so here, talking about WHO again, the dictator-approved WHO director Tedros owes his post as WHO director to China's voting power. One hand washes the other. On January 30th, 2020, only 6 days after a lockdown was imposed in Wuhan, he praised China's crisis management in the highest tones at a time when it was impossible to empirically determine if it were effective. He said, quote, "We would have seen so many more cases outside China by now and probably deaths if it were not for the government's efforts and the progress they have made to protect their own people and the people of the world. The speed with which China detected the outbreak, isolated the virus, sequenced the genome, and shared it with WHO and the world are very impressive. So is China's commitment to transparency and supporting other countries. In many ways, China is actually setting a new standard for outbreak response. It's not an exaggeration." Coming from the person in the charge of the WHO, the director, Tedros. Okay, now how does this relate to some of the globalists? Who's this Schwab guy? One of the most powerful friends of China in the West is Klaus Schwab, for the past 5 decades, the founder and executive chairman of the yearly elite Tea Party, the World Economic Forum in Davos, which has fostered the closest relationships with the communist central government in Beijing, as well as with Chinese universities for more than 30 years. Schwab is an avowed transhumanist and China fanboy. I'll make a quick point here. If you're not familiar with transhumanism, and I know it's already 12:56. This is a longer show. Sorry, it's just this is an important topic to cover. I'm nearing the end though. Transhumanism is the belief that human evolves from apes. Now the next step of evolution is by merging humans with technology, right? So Charles Schwab, there's an interview that came out, I think this is, I forget how long, maybe 5 or 10 years ago, where he was talking about how in the future, everyone will have implanted chips, microchips implanted under their skin, in their brains. And he's happy about this. He's talking about how great it's going to be to have these microchips implanted in us, right? There's a lot of talk about microchips and these things with Mr. Gates. So again, you can see the same agenda happening with all of this. It's a belief that mankind is greater than God, and that to take mankind to the next step, it must follow the path of transhumanism, which is the path of merging technology with humans. One of the biggest pushers of this is Elon Musk. If you look into his new company, I think it's called Neuralink, it's all about the merger of machine with the human body, merging inorganic with organic material, which, if you've seen Terminator, frightens the heck out of me. I do not believe that we should go down that path. Anyway, just a little kind of brief introduction to who this guy is, Klaus Schwab. Let's jump back to Mr. Schwab. So Schwab is also closely personally linked to China. Imagine that. His son, Oliver Schwab, is married to a Chinese woman and has led the World Economic Forum office in Beijing since 2011. Again, you look at they oftentimes have their wives, right? There's a lot of Chinese wives. Zuckerberg, where's his wife from? So Schwab Senior told the Chinese news magazine Xinhua News that China was technologically on a very good path, but the decisive step would be comprehensive acceptance and absorption of these new technologies like drone technologies into the West. Klaus Schwab's dream is the establishment of a biometric, technocratic surveillance state on the Chinese model. He's the author of multiple books and the co-author of a book, it's not a conspiracy, COVID-19, The Great Reset. In it, he describes the coronavirus as an unprecedented chance for a complete restructuring of the world economy and all aspects of social cooperation. For the transhumanist Schwab, artificial intelligence represents the next stage in the evolution of consciousness. He sees ordinary human beings with all their passions and weaknesses as a kind of discontinued model of evolution. So in the transhumanist Bible, I, Cyborg, the transhumanist visionary depicts thus, he says, just as we humans split ourselves off from our chimpanzee cousins, cyborgs will split from humans. Those who remain humans will likely become a kind of subspecies. They will be the chimpanzees of the future. Okay, interesting. So this here is a quote from Schwab talking about what's happening right now. It's our defining moment. Many things will change forever. The societal break caused by COVID-19 will last for years, maybe even generations. Many of us are wondering when things will be normal again. The short answer is never. So I'll just finish reading that quote. It says, our lingering and possibly lasting fear of being infected with a virus will thus speed the relentless march of automation, particularly in the fields most susceptible to automation. So that article goes on. It talks. It's a very in-depth article. As I mentioned, it's a 30-minute article to read through. So it's a long article. Like I said, I will post this into the description for the YouTube video. But I've been on here for over an hour, and I just wanted to close up with this because Um, okay, thankfully, okay, everyone can hear me now. It looks like. Um, what's happening now? And I hope that I've presented this in a way that I'm trying to leave a lot of my own personal biases out of this. Um, I have I have my own opinions on things that, again, I will give you pretty freely on this show, but it's all out there. You can look at these. You can look at the documentation. Like I said, I'm going to post all these articles up for you. You can read them. This is all out there for us, and it's up to us to look into these things more and understand these things because and it's a little bit difficult, but what's happening is truly, I believe, China is truly trying to implement a global communist system around the world, and they are doing it through their cooperation with the WHO, the other world governments, the politicians that have been bought off, and you can see it. You can see it right in front of you. In America here, this isn't about left versus right. It's not about left versus right, Trump versus Biden, black versus white, rich versus poor. It's not about that, right? We're all Americans. We all cherish our freedom. We value our freedom. And the more we can understand, the more that we can have compassion for people that don't see things how we see them, bridge these gaps, help people understand that each other, we are not the enemies. The enemies are these small group of people that are up here that are getting all of us to being focused on each other, right? I mean, the real battle, thank you, DG, great comment. This is good versus evil, right? Um, this is good. That's what this is. This is a battle of good versus evil. So now, as I've mentioned before, how do you have hope in this? Well, for me, I still have a lot of hope because I believe that this is their final plan playing out, and the Chinese communists are godless. Marx himself, when he says would wage a war against God, they are evil. They are satanic, but we have God on our sides. And that's the important thing. And I think that our nation and a lot of the world was detached from God. It got separated from God through a lot of these global and communist agendas that have been infiltrating our countries for decades and if not centuries to separate us from God, separate us from our values, our morals. And the more we can return to that, the more we can come together as one human race that cherishes life and cherishes beauty and tradition. That's going to help us combat this because that's what they want to break us up. Why do you think it is that they're shutting churches down? They're shutting churches down, arresting pastors. Why do you think that is? Because they're scared of that. Why do you think that they are blocking and silencing conservative voices and really any voices that are speaking out against these things? Because they're scared of it, right? Because they had to build these tools to try to enslave us, the internet, social media, except that they're now using. But the thing is that we can use these things against them. So we can come together, we can share with each other, we can talk to our neighbors, talk to our friends. Share this video with people. Help people realize that we have to come together because I believe that we have hope. Because ultimately, what is my most fundamental belief is that Satan didn't kick God out of heaven. God was powerful enough. God was in charge. He kicked Satan out. Satan is weaker than God. And there's nothing that will change my mind about that. Satan is weaker than God. So as long as we have God on our side, we are stronger than our enemies that only have Satan on their side. So, okay. I think this is a good time to end. It's been, over an hour. This has been a really enjoyable. Sorry, this is kind of a heavy episode. Apologize also for the technical difficulties, but this is important though. I mean, this is the defining moment of our civilization, what's happening right now. And so we have to realize that and play our roles and work on strengthening ourselves, strengthen our families, strengthen our relationship with God, or whatever your beliefs are, to find goodness and try to find compassion and just return to these things, return to tradition, reject these globalist things, fight back, refuse to accept these agendas that we now can see very clearly are being pushed down on us from communist China. I'll be back on Thursday at noon. Thank you all so much for coming today. Thank you for liking and sharing, and just honestly, thank you so much just for being on this journey with me. 6 months ago, I had no idea this is what was going to happen with my life, but I just feel so blessed to be in a position. I feel so blessed to have gotten to know so many of you and to see you coming up on every show. It's incredible, and I feel like it's just very humbled for this opportunity to speak to you and to um, share my thoughts with you. So I'm going to continue doing everything I can to find information to share with you, to help us find solutions, to help us find hope, to help us remind ourselves that we have to turn back towards goodness and turn back towards the principles and morals that our conscience has been telling us to not ignore for a lot of our lives. And maybe we have, maybe we haven't. But in the end, God wins. And I think that that's what we're going to see play out here. So, again, thank you everyone so much for coming and watching. I hope this was a good episode for you. I hope that it's not left you just full of despair, but inspiration, knowing more about who the enemy is and feeling more empowered about how we can step up against this. So thank you all. God bless. I'll see you on Thursday at noon. Don't forget to hit like, to subscribe, to put on notifications, and also just to share this with any friends that you think that might be interested in watching. All right. Thank you all. God bless.